here in Pennsylvania. Some of them quite famous, like the Lyman over in Countersport, which is about a half hour from me. He has some documentation of seeing the Thunderbirds, and then so I did a lot of research how like they might be teratorns, like ancient birds of prey. And sometimes what happens is I'll have this idea, and then I'll do some research, and I'll go to sleep and just kind of let it brew and see what happens. And when I'm writing the books, I'm starting my ninth one now. That's going to be the Totally Ninja Raccoons Discover the Lost World. It's going to be kind of a tribute to the original Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Kind of the influence of the Jurassic Park and a lot of lost dinosaur books and movies.
Oh, I know that one movie, John McClure or whatever his name was, they were in a submarine that they captured with the Germans on it yet, and they go to this island, and I think was that the one of the Lost World where they, ran into like prehistoric animals, and then they started running into prehistoric men that kind of advanced a little bit, and they end up getting trapped there. I mean, I'm really into that type of stuff, so that might be a very good read for young kids.
I love dinosaurs growing up, and you never really outgrow dinosaurs, so it's going to have kind of that feel, like they're going to discover a lost world of dinosaurs. And that's the one that I'm working on now. And what happens with that is like I'll get an idea and I'll start writing, and I usually can't write more than a couple pages a night. And then what I do is I stop, and then I go home and I see what happens next. So sometimes I'll go to sleep and see what the raccoons do next, see where the story goes. So when I start writing these stories, I have kind of a rough idea where I want to do with it. But a story, when you start writing it, at least for me, it kind of takes its own way. It finds its own path. Like sometimes I see the story writes itself, and sometimes I think the hardest part of writing is getting out of my own way and letting it do what it's going to do sometimes.
Well, how do you put yourself in a mindset for a younger reader? I mean, I don't know your age, but I mean, how do you bring yourself into that level where, you kind of be able to communicate with a younger person?
It's one of those things that it's actually, like I've written essays. I used to write book reviews for the paper, and for writing a children's book is actually harder than what a lot of people think. It's like, everybody says, well, I could write a children's book. But yeah, it's the mindset that really is important. So it's being, it's that I think it's accessing that natural storyteller that's in all of us, and being a little silly and having fun. When I do these, I really have a lot of fun with these. But like the hardest part is getting in the right mindset. So sometimes I work at the bookstore during the day, and then afterwards I go home and I eat supper with my wife, and sometimes this time of year I mow the lawn, and then I come back into work. And sometimes a bad day at work can mess up my writing because it's harder to get into that mindset. But it's one of those things. Once I get going, it's I think all of us have this youngster inside us, and this part of us that wants to be entertained, and a good book that is kind of ageless. So once I start writing it, it just kind of comes together. But sometimes getting in that spot takes some time.
What age group do you write these books for? I mean,
so the Totally Ninja Raccoons, the ages are it's about second to fourth grade, which is roughly 7 to 10. And that's the reading level I did, and that's like when you start writing, especially for this, because since I have a bookstore and I know a lot of writers, and you read you read books on advice on how to write, and usually when you start writing, the advice is to write for an audience. So what I did is I write for this audience, but what happens is, what every writer hopes happens is that audience is bigger than what you think. And I have found that to at least some degree, that's what's happened with this, because I do have, in fact, just this weekend, this past holiday weekend, we had a father who came up that they only visit Wellsboro about once a year, and they stopped by to see if there were any new ninja raccoons out, because they buy them whenever they visit. And so, of course, the latest was out, the Jersey Devil, and he said, "Oh, I love your books too," because his boys are a little bit younger than the 7 to 10, and he has to read them to them. But what he does is he reads a chapter a night to them. So I've actually had several adults who love these as well.
Well, it sounds like they get into it. How many page read are these? Out of curiosity,
they're about 50 pages. No, they're about 5,000 words. So like the werewolf is probably the shortest. That's like 30 or 31. The Jersey Devil, my latest one, got a little bit longer. That one's around 47 pages. I have these set up for what the industry calls a reluctant reader. Now, a reluctant reader isn't necessarily a bad reader, but a reluctant reader is just that, reluctant. They don't really like reading. They can't find something that interests them. And so what I did is I made these with relatively short chapters. Each chapter has an illustration. So I start off, each chapter has an illustration that is done by my illustrator, who goes by the name of Jubilee. He writes under a pen name. And each chapter is about 3 to 5 pages long. And so, like, what my goal with these is, but that is like if it's short, so that they feel a sense of accomplishment. Because a lot of times, when I've seen here with my experience in the bookstore, is that when you're working on finding a book for a child, if it's they can get intimidated if it's too long. So these aren't, they're not real long. They're topics that kids really like. Kids love ninjas. They love raccoons. They love animals. Like, they love the cryptids.
Oh yeah.
And I know when I was young. I mean, I still love cryptids, but when I was young, I remember checking out a book at the library about the Loch Ness Monster and wanting to know more about that. So I work those in to the story, and then what I do, what I finish each book with, I finish a book with an illustration of the creature and some information about it, some background, the folklore or background about the creature, and then I say, well, some people think this is real and some people don't. Why don't you it's basically what I do is encourage people to read more on their own. It's like, well, read up more on your own and you decide. So is this real? Is this not? No, read more about it. And if a child finds something of interest, they're going to read. And that's kind of my goal with these is to get a child interested in reading. It's, you find something that's fun to read, and then it makes the things that aren't so fun to read, well, it makes those easier to read. And so that's kind of like my goal with these is, like, there's already books that you have to read for school. There's books that you need to work for that you need to read for your certain jobs and for your work. And these aren't really the ones that you have to read for that. So these are fun. Kind of my main goal with these are entertainment first, and then the education kind of fills in, and they can, hopefully they'll want to read more.
Wow, that's a problem with a lot of kids. The younger ones. I have had 8 children. Now, they're all adults now. Out of the 8, only one would ever sit down and read a book. I mean, the other ones, you couldn't get them to read a book no matter what happened. I mean, you could even offer them money, they wouldn't sit down and read a book. But, back about, I'd say 10, 15, and going back farther than that, a lot of the books really, I hate to say it, didn't have any excitement to them.
No, that's true. I mean, there's all types of books, and I remember, when I'm like almost 50. I just turned 49 here in May, But one of the schools I went to when I was growing up, had been around for a while, and we still learn to read with those terrible Dick and Jane books. Do you remember those?
Oh boy, yeah, goes, yeah. Boy, I wish I would forget. I mean, that's going to be with me to the day I die. But all the way when I was in grade school, I mean, I have to be honest with you, the books had really, maybe for their time, but I mean, even that though, I mean, they didn't have no excitement to them. Now, I mean, like what you're bringing a little bit of the paranormal into it, bringing in, monsters and cryptics in it, and it gives the kids are into it. I mean, right now, on TV, we're back to like monsters and things like that, which, we go through those stages, the cowboy stages, then the detective police stages, then the war type stages. Then the comedies, like Roseanne Barr, or her ex show anyway. But the big thing now is getting back into, like space type movies. And, I hate to say it, back into like monsters and stuff like that. You got a network, it's called Comet. It shows old movies. Kids are into that stuff now, big time.
They do. I mean, I loved the monster movies growing up. I loved the Godzilla movies. I loved the movies from Universal. I loved the Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. I mean, those were they were comedy. They were a little scary, and that's kind of that's one of the things I took some inspiration from these. So these books they're funny, they're scary, but they're not too scary. So the creature, I mean, it's appropriate for the age level. I have something that is kind of scary at first, but not overly scary, and something to interest them, because sometimes when I see parents when they want their children to read, is the important thing is to match the book with the child. Because sometimes there's a book that you might like growing up, and that child may very well like it too, but they may not. You have to kind of meet a child where they're at.
Oh yeah, but I think what you're doing is you're bringing excitement in. I mean, and that right there will keep a kid. That's what when I went to school, trying to read a book, it was so boring, and it was, I couldn't get past the first couple of pages. I used to joke around, like when I was even in junior high school, we were assigned to read a book for the weekend for a class, and I come back to school and the teacher said, "Okay, what book did you get?" And I said, "I got War and Peace." And he goes, "War and Peace?" And I said, "Yeah, I read it in the closet." And he goes, "You read it in the closet? Do you have a light in the closet?" I said, "No." He goes, "How can you read War and Peace in the closet?" I said, "You can't." That was a bad joke, that. In other words, I didn't like reading. Okay, that's simply put. I mean, what better way you can get out of reading? Hey, I tried reading a book in the closet. There's no light. I couldn't read it. I didn't read a book, and that's the main thing. Is the even Black Beauty and all those stuff. I mean, I guess they're classics, and they are. But when you're like 8 years old or in fourth grade and stuff like that, books like that don't really draw you into it. You got to have some excitement to want you to flip the next page.
Yep, and that's what I do with these is, my goal is to draw the child in, and then that way, that they might go on to read something else. So sometimes some of those classics are easier to appreciate once you're older, and there are some classics that I've tried to read and just couldn't. Like I've tried to read Moby Dick several times, and I just can't get past the rendering blubber.
Well, I couldn't get past watching it in the movies either with Gregory Peck, back then when they made it. I could never get into it. It's just, to me it was not appealing. But, I guess some kids back at that time, being, swallowed by a whale and all that stuff, I guess, I don't know. I just don't find it. I think times have drastically changed. So you got to come out with stuff for our time and keep the kids, especially nowadays, because you're competing against video games, and TV and movies and the computer and the internet. So you got to come out with something